Well, good morning, folks. A little background on me. My name is George Wickstrom, and I'm going to talk with you about our heritage and some problems we're running into as a nation, and a little bit about my background as why I'm doing this. I've been interested in the economy for at least 40 years, and I've done a lot of research on it, and I'm going to share some of that with you. And I've also become very interested in the environment, and not quite as long, but we'll share some things in there with you also. So that's enough on me. I'd like to start off with the Revolutionary War and talk about our heritage, because I believe we're losing our heritage in this country. Our lifestyle has become unsustainable. 40% of our gross domestic product is about wants. And this is why I want people to understand what we're doing to ourselves. In other words, what I'm saying is we met Pogo, and the enemy is us. But okay, Ben Franklin, he was born in 1706. By the time he was 5 years old, he could read the Bible. His dad put him into school till he was age 8, but then he couldn't afford it anymore. So he put him to work in his candle shop. Someplace along the line, one of his brothers was in the printing business, and Ben went to work for him. So he had an example of or a background in printing. Printing back in those days was incredible. You had to start at the back of what you're going to print and work forward. Everything was backwards. You had to spell the words backwards and everything. So he was able to do that. Okay, so as time went by, he had four things that he put together, and he was probably about 10, 15 years old. One of them was be industrious. The second was be extremely frugal. The third was be truthful, and the fourth was speak ill of no man. There were four of his codes when he put together for himself, before he put together his 13 points for self-improvement. We'll talk a little bit about that. But he was an incredibly bright person. Let's talk about the 13 points. When he was walking down the streets of Philadelphia, he was born in Boston, but he moved to Philadelphia when he ran away from his brother in the printing business, and made most of his career there. When he was in Philadelphia, he was walking down the street with one of his friends, Tom Denton. And Tom said, "Look, Ben, people are crossing the street to avoid confronting you. They don't like you. And I'm your only friend. If something happens to me, you're not going to have anybody to talk with. Isn't there something you can do about that?" Ben took that to heart, and he put together 12 points for himself to work on his character and be more acceptable to people. And somebody along the line looked at the 12 points and said, "Ben, aren't you forgetting one?" And Ben said, "No, what?" "Humility." So the 13th one is humility. So Ben used those to improve his character and to improve his ability to work with people. He did that. 13 points worked out just fine, because 13 goes into 52 exactly 4 times. So he had each one of those. He went to 1 through 13, and then started again at the 14 was number 1 again, did that 4 times. He completely changed his personality. And his life was one of always looking for the next step and changing his character and person. He was always a work in progress. Okay, so now he's in the printing business on his own. He started his own printing business and expanded that to a number of different countries. At the same time, he was working on inventions. His first invention was the lightning rod, but he made many others. He developed bifocal glasses. He developed musical instruments. And all these things he could have patented, but he patented nothing. All of these things were, from his perspective, a gift to people, and he didn't want to encumber anybody from getting them. Okay, when we're starting to get in trouble with the Boston Tea Party and so forth, and the Tax Act, England, the relationships with England were really going downhill. And Ben was trying for the best of his ability to keep the colonies with England. And he was trying to work out ways for that to be possible. He was over in England, and somebody figured that he was up to some no good as far as England was concerned. He was put before Parliament, and they castigated him, and he just stood there and took it. And that was the end of our relationships as far as Ben Franklin was concerned, trying to make good relations with England. That's when the things fell apart. So then we get into the war. We had to put together a military and so forth. John Adams was the one that proposed George Washington for the commander-in-chief to the army, and he defended him when the siege on Washington. New York came. The British came over with 40 ships, 36,000 troops, and all kinds of. I think it was more than 40 ships. Might have been. I think it was 400 ships, and they had the siege on where what was the place that where we had the children that were killed in the school. That was Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook was where the British landed, and Washington went out to meet them, not knowing the numbers were way against him. He found out, and was making plans to go exit and get across the Hudson River back to mainland. And the instructions got mixed up. His troops were going the wrong way, and he thought he lost everything. But they turned him around. He wanted to do everything by night, and so they got to the shore, and they started evacuating. And it was daylight was coming, and the British were coming. A heavy fog came in, covered everything. It was pea soup. He left a small group of people to make noise, like they were still encampment there, but they got almost everybody across the river during the fog. And how those people could navigate in that was a miracle. Well, right after that, they wanted to fire George Washington because he didn't fight the British. And John Adams came to his rescue and saved him. So, and then the next day, Christmas Day was coming up. There was a march on Trenton, and Washington lost no troops in the battle. He lost 2 men in that encounter. How did he lose them? They froze to death. These guys were not properly dressed. Many of them didn't have shoes. They had rags around their feet. The saying was you could easily follow Washington's army, just look for the blood in the snow. So that's the kind of things that we were part of our heritage, what people went through to get us free from England. And there was all kinds of negotiations by Franklin to get France on our side. He was, without a doubt, the only person in the whole world that could have made the deals with France. He was a master negotiator. Took him 2 years. Who was it? John Hancock, and who was the other man? I can't remember. John somebody else came over to France, tried to boost things up. Franklin says, "I know what I'm doing. Get back home. You're going to screw it up." And he finished up, got the job, and we got the support of France. One of their officers, a 19-year-old guy, Lafayette or something like this, became one of the master generals. A 19-year-old man from France was Washington's right-hand man when they finally defeated the British down in Virginia. What was it? I can't think of the name of her right now, but anyway, yeah. So there was all those things that went on, but most of that was done under the efforts of Ben Franklin. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Let's move into modern day. Let's go to World War II. There's so many things in between, but I want to get to modern day heroes. We had December 7th. In January of 42, a guy by the name of Jimmy Doolittle went to Congress and wanted to set up a bombing raid on Japan. And he got permission to do it. I don't know how long that took. But what they wanted to take planes off of an aircraft carrier. Well, bombers are not designed to be flown off of aircraft carriers. But he got 16 B-25s. They're called Billy Mitchells back in those days. They were a two-engine, very durable bomber. They had a payload of 3,000 bombs, but they only put 2,000 pounds on because they had to get the weight down as far as they could, took all the stuff off the planes that they could because of the weight. And these planes only had a range on normal gas of about 1,200 miles. And they wanted to get airborne about 2 hours, or maybe their cruising speed was about 230 miles an hour. So they wanted to get off 2 hours before, so it's about 450 miles that they fly to get to Japan. And then there's about 2,300 miles across the water between Japan and China. And part of China was occupied by Japan because they had conquered Japan in 1938. Or Japan had conquered China in 1938. So, but guess what? There were about 10 hours from Japan, and a Japanese patrol boat seized the ship. So they got to get off early. So these guys took off these planes, knowing that they probably didn't have enough fuel to get. They knew they didn't have enough fuel to get to the airport at places in China that they were going to, and maybe not enough to get across the water between Japan. But guess what? They all took off, taking that chance, risking their lives to get this project going. Well, one of the planes, two of the planes, landed in Japanese territory on Japan. 3 of them were executed. Later on, the other 3, somehow in negotiations, we got them free. 3 people died. Anyway, one of these planes was damaged heavily. So there were 5 people on each of these planes: pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, and navigator. And then the last one was, I'd call him an engineer. His job was to keep that plane in the air. If things got hurt and damaged, hydraulics or whatever it was, he was supposed to accomplish whatever was necessary to keep that plane in the air. Well, one of the planes was heavily damaged. The hydraulics went out. The bomb bay doors didn't close. Part of the tail was taken off. One of the right engine was on fire. He was able to get that plane to belly land on the sand just as he got across the water. Almost a miracle. So that's some of the thing that was done early in the war. Let's go to John McCain. John McCain was a fighter pilot in the Vietnam War. And he was shot down not far from Saigon, I think. And it was in a lake close by. And he was captured. He was in prison 5 years. When he was when he was there 4.5 years, his dad had some kind of a position in the military. I don't know which branch or what his office was, but he had negotiated to move John McCain's prison, shorten it by 1 year, and take somebody else and put him in the John McCain's place. They went to John and said, "We got you free." John said, "No, I'm not. I'm going to stay." John McCain suffered another year. He was tortured brutally, and that's the kind of people that we have had in our history that we are forgetting about. Let's move on now to so I'm talking about our heritage. We got to grow up in this country, folks. We're living too high on the hog. let's go look. Now, I said earlier, 40% of our gross domestic product is about wants. We've got a passenger ship or a cruise ship that has more than 4 times the passenger capacity than the Titanic. The Titanic could carry 2,200 people and crew. This ship could carry between about 9,700 people. 4+ times. We want bigger and better all the time. We are part of our economy is built-in obsolescence. The new cars every year, different models every year, and we there's no end to it. Who was it? Jerome Powell on 60 Minutes about 3 or so months ago. I didn't see the original broadcast, but I saw a replay of it. He said our debt is unsustainable, and he's absolutely right. Let's talk about our debt right now. That's a good time to start that. I've researched this. This country has always been 4.5% of the world's population. At one time, we were using 25% of the world's goods and services. Today, we're down to about 18%. But at the end of World War II, we're the only country left standing that was not damaged by the war. All the developed nations were bombed out. And so we have a market that's unbelievable for 4.5% of the world's population. Our debt to the gross domestic product in 1946, about 4 months or so after the war was over. The war was over in Japan in September 5th or 15th, something like that. Signed the treaty on the Missouri. We had the world by the tail. We had our debt to GDP was 118%. Now listen to this. We drove that down to 31% in 1974. What is that? About 26 or so years later. But guess what? Even though the debt ratio went down to 30%, the debt was higher. How could that happen? Because what happened is the gross domestic product went up at a very steep curve because of the market we had. The debt went up at a much slower pace. So our debt has always gone up. We paid our bills by going into debt. When I was a kid, my mother would send me to the store to Eckert's Bakery in Roselle, Illinois, where we were living. So we had, I gave me a dime for a loaf of bread. That same bread today is $4. Most of the inflation that we've got today is from the federal government. People think that the president in office is responsible for the inflation. Yeah, they can do things to make it inflation, but most of it is built into the system, and it can't be stopped because we got too much debt, and we also have too much what we call unfunded liabilities. What's an unfunded liability? It's something that you have a growing responsibility for. Like, for example, down in Medford, about 2-3 years ago, they had a sewer plant that they didn't have $51,000 to repair. So what did they have to do? They dumped 38,000 gallons of raw sewage into our state river. That was an unfunded liability. Okay? Now what we have today is we've got Social Security and Medicare. Social Security was started in 1935 under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. A 35-year-old, a 65-year-old, which was normal retirement in 35, had a life expectancy of about 6 to 8 years. Okay, let's move forward. Today we moved that 65 up to 67. A 67-year-old today has a life expectancy of 17 to 18 years. That difference has not been accounted for in reducing the payout or increasing the rate where you become eligible for Social Security. So what we have is a big unfunded liability. What is it for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid? It's $73 trillion. Guess what? Our total debt right now is $36 trillion. That was as of fiscal year ending September 30th of last year, 2023. So we've got that unfunded liability. What else do we have unfunded liabilities about? Well, 36% of the bridges in this country, that's over 20,000, I believe it is. It's a lot of bridges. We have no money to repair or replace them. We're going to have to sell bonds or print money. Selling bonds is debt, printing money is inflation. What else? What about pension plans? I've been in financial services for over 47 years. And I know I had licenses for the investments, and I advise people that want to live under retirement with investments, don't expect to get a return on your investments of more than 3.5%. Well, the federal government pension plans they're estimating 6.9%. Most of the states are at 7%. They're double what they should be estimating. And guess what? Why do I say that? Well, what happened in 2007, 8, and 9? 2007, October, the Dow was at 14,300 something. That was the top of the market. The big drop was in 2008. The bottom was in 2009. The Dow went down to just a little over 6,000, lost over half its value. Guess what? We're going to pay pension plans at the same rate when the market is down. You're taking money out at the bottom. That money never recovers. It's gone. So that's why, and there's a lot of that going on in the country right now. I don't know what the unfunded liabilities are for pension plans, but it's there. Our unfunded liabilities, what about 41,000 miles of roads put under by Dwight Eisenhower when he was in war? We don't have any money set aside to repair those things. We pay out of current income. Well, the current income can't do it. It's no different than a person owning a house and setting aside no funds for the repair of windows, roofs, water heaters, you name it. So that's what the country we're in trouble for. We got debt that we can't pay, and we have no way out to do it. Our unfunded liabilities and our debt is unsustainable. What would be my estimate when we're getting in trouble? Well, they're telling us that Social Security will be out of money in about 32. That might be right, but it might be wrong. It might be sooner than that because the birth rate is down 4.5% in the last report, and we have the biggest group of people, that growing group of people are in my group. I'm 94 years old. When I was born, I was expected to live 59.7. I'm 30-some years overdue. There's a lot of people, but the average death, you look at the obituaries, and most people are in their 80s when they're dying. We haven't accommodated for that, and as a result, this group is growing, and if it grows more than the people feeding in, we've got a problem with employment, and if the people that are being employed are at the lower levels of the jobs and so forth, the people paying in will be reduced compared to the people that are taking out. That could shorten up. I don't know if that'll happen or not, but it looks like that's where it's going right now. The United States, again, I said earlier, is 4.5% of the world's population. I've known about CO2 back in the 1970s. I was director of manufacturing of a company at that point, and we had to change the way we were melting iron. We had a cupola, a very, very pollutant operation, and so we had to find a way to overcome that. So we eventually bought electric melt, but the point is, CO2 was a problem back in those days. We are 4.5% of the world's population. We put in 12.5% of the CO2 in the atmosphere. The second largest economy is China, but they put 30% of the CO2 in the atmosphere. Russia puts in 5%. all of Europe puts in about 70%. And so the bottom line is when you get all those countries up to about 60%. And at this point, how are our relationships with China? Not too good. The only way that we could ever get China on board would be if we've got scientists in the United States who could have relationships with scientists, environmental scientists in China, maybe have some influence on Xi Jinping. I don't know. But it's highly unlikely that we're going to overcome the problems we have with CO2. And not only that, we don't talk much about it, but methane is a big problem in Siberia and northern Alaska. Methane has about 1/3 the shelf life of CO2, but it's much more highly damaging to the environment. And as the temperature in Alaska and Siberia increase, it's probably 4 degrees higher than we have an increase in Minnesota. It's melting the tundra. The tundra has water. That water runs into cavities and produces little ponds and lakes. And the methane is released at the same time. And these lakes the water seeps down during the warmer weather and more methane. It looks at this point where the methane is reproducing itself at a rate that is greater, maybe even greater than it's reducing. So we've got all these problems, and we're not even paying attention to it. And people have to be informed. We have most of our citizens are more interested in what we own than who we are and what's going on in the world and the economy. We are an uninformed nation to a very high degree. Not everybody, but to a high degree, and we're going to be looking for some serious times, and it's going to be far worse than the Depression of the 1930s. Only 2 things took us down then. That was the speculation in real estate and buying stocks 10 cents on the margin. But today, there was only one government that I knew back then. That was the Federal Reserve that was started in 1913. But today, the federal government has 15 different departments, lots of employees, and we're overburdened with overhead, and don't have enough taxation to take care of it. Well, let me end the program with this. Folks, democracy requires that we participate. We need to have people that are informed on the basic elements that keep our country safe. And we're not doing that. We're too much, and I'll repeat myself, we're too busy having fun with the 40% of our gross domestic product being for wants. Why do we pay football players and baseball players and actresses millions of dollars? Millions of dollars. That's because of marketing and our interest in advertising and our interest in these fun and games things. We're not paying attention to what our responsibilities are to be good citizens. So that is my Sermon on the Mount for the day, and hope this was helpful. And I strongly suggest you live within your income and be sure that you've got some conservative assets that will not be affected by downsizing of values.